creating the
What's
fire.
management saying to you?
Management didn't even bother to look into it. Immediately said, well, you're hypersensitive, which is what I talked to the council about. It doesn't fly very well. I've talked to the National Noise Clearinghouse. They are used to this. They're used to landlords using that ruse, so they don't have to do anything. They said go to the city council. The city council tells the police what to do. It's the only way you're going to get action. And the problem I have all along is, well, how do I'm talking about something that goes on all day intermittently. How do I prove it to you? I don't.
Okay, here we have yet another abrupt transition. This one was introduced again by the police officer. He asked a perfectly valid, good question. What does management say about this? There's nothing wrong with that question. It's a question he should ask. However, he just interrupted me and totally changed the subject when he introduced it. And what is the purpose of that? It is once again to stop me from going in the direction I'm trying to take this and to take control of the situation himself. Once again, I was not allowed to present stage 2 evidence, this argumentation. Now I had to react and respond to whatever he had just asked me, which was on a totally different subject. If you want the full and accurate and correct answer to his question, you would have to read the entire profile of the pathetic landlord as found on my website. That's a very long piece of writing. How was I supposed to explain all of that to him right there? And what would have been the relevance when the final answer is management doesn't care if I live or die?
And even if it is intermittently throughout the day, it's it's a part of apartment living. And
okay, that is one of the most significant statements this police officer made. That's a part of apartment living. First of all, he did not know what that was. He didn't let me present the audio evidence. He didn't let me finish the argumentation evidence. He didn't know what noise I was talking about. So how does he know whether or not that's a part of apartment living? Second of all, there is nothing in the law that I'm aware of that says that apartment dwellers are subject to forms of terror and torture that homeowners are protected from. I'm not aware of that kind of discrimination. I'm not aware of that. Okay, the correct response to what he just said is, no, sir, this is not a part of apartment living. You can call this an apartment, you can call it a teepee, you can call it a mansion. I don't care what you call it. I call it my home, and there is no excuse for noise that violates the law that you are supposed to enforce being injected into my home. Period. That statement that just because I'm in an apartment, I'm supposed to deal with that kind of terror and torment is absolutely inexcusable and irresponsible. I should also point out that the statement, that's a part of apartment life, clearly and unequivocally implies two things. It implies that what the perpetrator is doing is not wrong, and it implies that what I am doing by reacting to it the way I am is wrong. In other words, he is blaming the victim and protecting the perpetrator. And yet, as I just said at the very beginning of this comment, he doesn't even know what noise I'm talking about. In fact, this is the very first of a clear pattern of statements this guy's going to make in the future, which blames the victim, defends the perpetrator, and exonerates himself of any obligation to do anything at all, such as his job or enforcing the law, for example. I want to emphasize this. This man had walked into a situation he had never been in and knew nothing about. 4 minutes and 8 seconds later, much of which was filled with me saying nothing, this man made a pronouncement that blamed the victim, defended the perpetrator, and exonerated him from doing anything at all. That's the judgment that this man came to after 4 minutes and 8 seconds.
I mean, they're putting up a Christmas tree, so I can understand their side of things right now. Pulling tubs up and probably banging into walls and,
Sure,
assembling something.
For 6 months all the time when no one else does, and the sounds are, God darn it, let's see. This is the problem. That's why that other audio was better, because I pulled out the ones that you could hear.
All right, this is not the only time he says this. This is the first time he says that they have every right to put up a Christmas tree and to bang tubs around and such. There is so much wrong with that statement. Now, maybe when he was walking in, he looked up and saw these people putting up a Christmas tree in the window. I don't know. Either way, they had lived there for 6 months. It doesn't take 6 months to put up a Christmas tree. I had to deal with the foot-stomping bitch for a full year before that, and I had to deal with the guy who lived in that apartment before her. To say that putting up a Christmas tree is what had caused, at that point, almost 2 years of that kind of noise, Again, absolutely irresponsible, irrelevant. He had no business saying that. This guy doesn't know me from Adam. I am the most understanding neighbor you will ever find. You want to have a party? You have a party. I'm not calling the police. You want to put up a Christmas tree? You put up a Christmas tree. I'm not going to complain about it. My complaint is that this noise was violent, loud, vibrated my home, and went on all the bloody time. That's a different story than a couple people putting up a Christmas tree on one Saturday morning. And I don't see where there's anything in what I said to this guy that implied that my complaint dealt solely with what they had done that particular morning. I think I made it perfectly clear that this had gone on since the day they moved in.
Well, if you look, I mean, if an audio engineer looks at the waveforms, you can tell that the attack, the release, and the decay, what the form of the sound is. The sound is violent. It's not, it's like the difference between, you know, a military explosion and a gas leak or something. I mean, they're deliberate. You can't create that noise without deliberate extreme momentum. That's kind of, I don't know how to...
Okay, at the end of the previous segment, you heard me fumbling to respond to that absolutely asinine statement that putting up a Christmas tree was behind this. What you hear in this most recent clip is me changing the subject back to the science of sound. If you want to know what I'm talking about here, go to my website. Under Noise and Noise Trauma in the menu, look for the nature of the noise. I'm talking about physics. I'm talking about science. I am clearly explaining to this guy that there is a fundamental difference in the nature of someone tapping a pillow with a cucumber and somebody firing up a chainsaw right next to your ear. There's a fundamental difference in what you hear, how you hear it, how it affects your body, how it affects your mind, how it affects your emotions, how it affects your spirit. That's what I'm trying to explain to this guy right here. Does he sound like a scholar who's interested in learning more about this?
Yeah, but the thing is, you know, like if you go to the National Noise Clearinghouse, look at the academic studies on it. It's destroying my life, my cardiovascular. It's hurting me at work. My people at work are the first ones who called the city. I didn't even know they did it because they're so worried about the effect it's having on me. I haven't slept in 6 months. I haven't worked on anything in 6 months. My work and relationships at work are degrading. I have a professional.
All right, what's going on here is I'm descending into stream of consciousness. I'm throwing every piece of artillery I have at this guy. Every fact, every idea, every concept I can to try to flip this guy's light switch into the on position so that he will recognize that there's something serious going on here, because he seems to be totally oblivious to it. I'm talking about the fact that there are many noise advocacy organizations, funded organizations all across the world whose sole purpose is to educate legislators about the impact of noise on health. I'm talking about the fact that there is abundant academic evidence, peer-reviewed, published journal articles showing pretty clearly that noise is very dangerous to human health, or at least that under the right circumstances it can be. I'm even pointed out that I'm in Meannesota, for heaven's sake. Nobody cares about anyone but themselves. And yet even there at work, one of the supervisors in my department, on their own, called the city of New Brighton to get a phone number for who I could talk to because they could tell the impact that this was having on me. And by the way, when I called that guy, the code enforcement officer for New Brighton, he never returned my call. You see, what you're hearing from me right now is total desperation. I'm throwing everything I've got at this guy just to try to get him to acknowledge that there's something very, very serious that needs serious attention. Now let's see whether he got that message or if he's going to make yet another stupid statement.
Well, job, and I'm very well liked.
When's your lease up?
Well, again, why should I have to
Right,
wait for
but
someone
I mean,
else's?
if it's to that point where you're not getting the action
But
that you
there's-
need through other ways, I mean, that would be...
If nobody does anything about it, then
Well, what do you know? He made another stupid statement. When's your lease up? As a law enforcer, as a representative of the New Brighton Department of Public Safety, the award-winning Department of Public Safety, by the way, as a representative of the city of New Brighton, his suggestion is that the best response in this situation to other people breaking the law is that the victim should bear the full burden of time, effort, expense, and life disruption to move somewhere else. Now, in the introduction to this video, I made a special point of emphasizing that I had lived there for 7 years at that time, that it was a familiar place, it was my home. These neighbors had moved in 6 months earlier and had been a nightmare from the day they arrived. They should have been thrown out within a month. His answer is that I bear all the burden and move away. Now think about that logically for just a moment. He's saying, I'm not going to enforce the law. It's your job to pay the price as the victim and to bear the full burden. Now if that's the case here, why wouldn't it be that case anywhere else I go in New Brighton or Meannesota? So I bear all that expense, I move away, I get settled in somewhere else, and I find myself in the same situation. A bunch of violent Neanderthal neighbors and a police department who refuses to enforce the law. Am I supposed to move yet again? And again? And again? It seems to me that the better solution is that this man just does his job right then and there and stops the perpetrator instead of blaming the victim. Because if he had done that, I would not be sitting here holding a microphone out in the middle of Timbuktu talking about this. I would still have my life, my home, my life savings, my job, my career, my possessions. I would still have a life worth living if at that very moment he had done his job. What you just heard was that moment of transition when I went from having a life with hope and possibility to a life not worth living. Right there, you just heard it, folks. You just heard it. And before we move on, I would point out the prolonged silence at the end of that last segment. That prolonged silence came from me just looking at this guy with my mouth open, not having a word to say to him. He had established himself as such either an idiot or so callous and apathetic about other people's suffering that there's nothing I could say to this guy. That's why this was the end of my life. At that very moment, that silence is where the gears were shifting in my head saying, hope is now gone. That's what that silence represents.
I'm here speaking of the last 15 minutes at 10 in the morning. I think, again, I'm not taking total sides, but I think someone has a right to be able to put up a Christmas tree with some sort of manual labor that, yes, will cause noise, and in apartment living, I think they have a right to
One,
put
two,
that
three,
up.
4, and 5 in the morning.
Well, I'm just talking about the last 15 minutes.
Well, sure.
Okay, folks, as if this conversation wasn't already bad enough, it just took a descent toward hell. Once again, this police officer leaned on his cherished Christmas tree theory to explain how my neighbors had made so much noise night and day for 6 months. Not to mention the neighbors who had made additional noise for a year and a half previous to that. His Christmas tree theory, I hope you recognize by now, ranks right up there with the single bullet theory. I'm starting to lean toward this guy is an idiot. Either that or he is so mean-spirited, so vicious that he would pull crap like that out of his ass and throw it and rub it in my face to make it seem like I'm doing something wrong. Notice in particular his use of the phrase, they have the right. Where have we heard of rights before? Maybe the Bill of Rights, which is the Constitution, which is, in my personal opinion, the greatest achievement of mankind to date, much superior to landing on the moon. So this man is presenting himself as law enforcement, the man in uniform with a badge who's defending people's rights. But the rights of who? He had not even spoken to those people upstairs yet. He didn't know what they looked like unless he saw them through the window when he came in. He still had not heard the noise I was talking about. He still did not let me present the audio evidence or the argumentative evidence. He wasn't listening to a word I said, and he doesn't say a word about my rights. He talks about their rights. The perpetrators have rights. I am accusing them of committing a crime, and that's his response. They have the right to yada, yada, yada. I never said a word about stopping them from putting up a Christmas tree. If they need to make noise for a while, I could care less. That I do expect in an apartment. It isn't the existence of noise that bothers me. It's the existence of loud and violent, persistent, constant, never-ending noise. That guy cannot get this through his head. If you haven't figured out yet, we're still 3 minutes away from the end of his visit. If you haven't figured out yet that this guy is totally useless and that the department of public safety that he represents is totally useless, and that the city of New Brighton that these guys represent are totally useless, then you might as well just hit the stop button right now. How dare that man talk about the perpetrators of a crime and pull out the phrase, "they have the right," and rub it in my face like excrement, because that is exactly what this guy just did. Notice also, for the third time, he mentioned 15 minutes. He'd been there 15 minutes, right? Take a look at your watch and find out for yourself. But I'll give you one hint. His entire visit, which isn't over yet, only lasted 8.5 minutes. The last thing I would mention on this segment is to notice that his tone is starting to get more hostile. Hostile. I called him about people committing a crime that was hurting me, the victim, and he's getting hostile toward me. And if you don't believe me, listen on. Listen to his next statement, and you tell me whether that is kind, compassionate, understanding, empathetic, or is it hostile?
Okay. I'm not.
This isn't what I'm talking about. This isn't remotely what I'm talking about. I haven't heard a thing yet.
Why didn't you call at 1 and 2 in the morning?
I was going to. I was laying on that pillow here while they did it, but they would do it and then it would stop. And I had the phone, and I was like, well, how are they going to witness it? It's the same problem I have right this instant.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, if you look, if you could see the sounds, it goes on all night. Mm-hmm. Unless you're here all the time, which you're not going to be. How would you know?
We're not going.
But if I'm trying to sleep, well, they woke me up when I had headphones on. How do you wake someone up through that kind of...
Did you hear that, folks? Did you hear what came out of his mouth? Why didn't you? In other words, it's the victim's fault. Why did the victim do this? Why didn't the victim do that? Once again, I refer you to my website. Under Noise and Noise Trauma, there is a page called Trauma by Any Other Name. In there, I quote some of the most famous kidnap, rape victims. I believe all of them were children when they were kidnapped and raped. Natasha Kampuch and Elizabeth Smart. Every one of them says that even more painful than the actual assault, and you're talking about a child being kidnapped from their home and raped, even more traumatic for them was other people saying to them when they finally escaped, "Why didn't you do this or that?" Or, "Why did you do this or that?" That is implying that somehow they asked for it, which is just like saying to a rape victim in a bar, "Well, why'd you stay in that bar when that guy was hitting on you?" Which implies that it's her fault that some guy violently raped her. That's exactly what this officer is doing right here, right now. You just heard it. If you didn't, hit reverse for a couple minutes and listen to it again. Now, as far as the specific statement he's making, he's asking me, why didn't you call us at 1 or 2 in the morning? Does it matter if the crime was committed at 1 or 2 in the morning? There's nothing in the noise ordinance, the New Brighton noise ordinance, that points out only during certain times of day. Maybe I just didn't want to disrupt our entire building with a loud flurry of police visit in the middle of the night. Maybe I was trying desperately to sleep. And if my choice was to either get up and waste an hour and get my heart flowing so much that I can't sleep for the next 3 hours, or to at least try to lay down with my headphones on and get back to sleep, maybe catch a few winks before they wake me up again, maybe I preferred that. It's none of his business why I didn't call at 1 in the morning. It's not more of a crime at 1 in the morning than it is at 10 or at noon or at 6 p.m. or at any other time. That noise has no business being injected into my home, period. What this man was doing with that statement was trying to divert attention away from the perpetrators and onto me. It's my fault. If only I had called them at 1 in the morning instead of at 10 in the morning. Well, really, would they have listened to the audio evidence at 1 in the morning? Would they have listened to the argumentation at 1 in the morning any better than he did here? Does he function better at 1 in the morning? If so, then why is he on duty at 10 in the morning when he's obviously dysfunctional? If you can't tell by how upset I am right now, this is 2 years after this happened. Listen how upset I am. Can you imagine how upset I was then? And yet, listen to me. I never raised my voice to this guy. I do my damnedest to show respect for this guy as a police officer when he deserved none.
I don't have a magic bullet. A lot of people, many people will call the police to take care of their problems and solve the issue, and I'm not going to solve it in 15 minutes for you.
Now, I don't know about you, but I consider that to be talking down to a person who called the police to report a crime. This man made it sound like I was calling my mommy and my daddy to save me. Okay? He clearly says, people call the police, they expect them to solve their problems for them, but I don't have a magic bullet. Well, guess what? Again, listen to the introduction to this video, and you'll find out that I avoided calling the police throughout this entire ordeal up until his bosses told me to call the police. The mayor of New Brighton, David Jacobson, told me to call the police. Police Chief Jacobson told me to call the police. Sergeant Nelson told me to call the police. His bosses told me to call the police. And he's there chastising me for what? For calling the police to solve my problems for me. Now, if that is not a schizophrenic city council and police department, then friend, you tell me what is. And as if all that wasn't bad enough, yet again, for the fourth time, he talks about being there for 15 minutes. Apparently 15 minutes lasts for an eternity, because according to his own words, it has lasted almost throughout his entire visit so far.
So, I don't have a good answer for you. I can just say I spoke with them. They were putting up a Christmas tree. I said, hey, we got a complaint. They said, okay, sorry, I didn't mean to do anything wrong, but we are putting this up.
Friends, I don't know how much worse this can get. I am just sick even listening to this. You just heard a 12-second segment that I could speak for a half hour on. Where do I even begin with that? He says he has no answer for me. Well, how could he when he wouldn't even listen to what the problem is? He says they're putting up a Christmas tree. And again, unless he saw them doing something in the window that I didn't know about, how does he know that? He says already that they're going to tell him, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know we were doing that. We'll stop making the noise. Did he not hear anything I said about how I had spoken to them before and they didn't care? They didn't stop making the noise at all. And that's not to mention that the fact that according to the same recording, 2 hours later, those people upstairs subjected me to an intense barrage in retaliation for this police call. Now I have to ask the question, not only of any random listener who's viewing this video, but the New Brighton City Council, New Brighton Police Department. Does that guy sound competent to you? If that's your idea of competence, then God help every resident of New Brighton, Minnesota. And if there's anyone out there who wants to know why New Brighton resident Todd Stevens was shot dead by his neighbor after 44 police calls to the feud between those two, I suggest that you listen to this police call recording over and over and over again until you finally get it. There's a reason why I say on my website with all the confidence I have in me that Todd Stevens would be alive today if this police department gave a damn about other people. In fact, you know what? I'm going to stop commenting on this altogether and let the remainder of this visit play itself out. I don't even need to say anything. This has less to do with me explaining what's wrong with this guy and what's wrong with this police department than with the people out there in Minnesota not seeing the obvious. Listen to the rest of this yourself and figure it out. I am sick and tired of teaching Minnesotans things that they should have learned in grade school.
That doesn't address your issue at 1 in the morning because, that was at 1 in the morning. So, all I can do is say that's what I did up there. They're aware of that police were called out. And that's about it at this point.
All right. Well, the next step, I mean, I don't know if you take notes on it or anything. I need to get their name and such. I have 500 hours of recordings that would timestamped all days and night with the analyzers and stuff. I'm gonna have to record or something. They've cost me so much money just in terms of the
you should
business.
talk to your management about that also.
Management.
And who they are.
Management doesn't. He gets paid.
Sure. Okay. Well.
But, I mean,
Well,
no one should have to
they came
live
out-
this way with their stuff all jammed
There'll be a
up.
report on file that I came out every apartment we go to. We do a report. So. Okay.
What's the easiest way to find that?
As far as what?
To find your report.
Oh, you can go to City Hall or Police Department and just tell them where you live in your apartment.
Okay.
Yep. And they'll be able to hook you up. So.
Okay, but please be aware, this isn't about just now. This is about 2.5 days I've hardly slept and my vacation's been ruined. I was trying to get started on my work in there. And they ruined it again. it's about more than what's going on right now.
Yep, I totally understand
And
that
I
from
understand
the first
your
time I got in here, so
I understand your point.
I'll document it for you.